The first thing torn that evening was not Rosamund Vale's apron, but the last thread of patience she had kept for the people who called cruelty good breeding. Blythe House had been polished until it shone like a jewel set upon the Yorkshire hills, all candlelight, silver, beeswax, and carefully arranged flowers. But Rosamund stood where no guest was meant to look, beside the servant passage with a basket of mending against her hip and a length of blue thread caught between her fingers. Beyond the half-closed door, footmen moved with trays. The housekeeper whispered orders, and the drawing-room waited for rank, money, and admiration to enter in proper sequence. Rosamund wore a plain grey gown that had once belonged to Lady Honoria Blythe, and had been let down at the hem twice. Over it, because Lady Maribel insisted that usefulness should not be hidden, when one lived on charity, she wore a linen apron with a tear near the pocket. The tear was small, no longer than the width of 2 fingers, but Lady Honoria had noticed it that morning, and smiled as if she had found a stain on Rosamund's soul. "Do try to look grateful tonight," Honoria had said, while Rosamund knelt to pin the flounce of her evening gown. "His Grace dislikes desperate people," Rosamund had not answered. She had learned that silence could be a door, a wall, or a weapon, depending on how straight one held one's back. Now she pulled the needle through the linen and made the blue stitches neat, even, and almost invisible. Her mother had taught her that a woman could mend more than cloth if her hands did not tremble. Her father had taught her Latin verbs, estate arithmetic, and the dangerous belief that a gentleman's daughter should never confuse poverty with shame. Both were gone. Blythe House remained. "Miss Vale." Lady Maribel's voice cut through the passage with the soft sharpness of a paper knife. Rosamund rose at once, the basket still on her arm. Lady Maribel Blythe stood beneath the archway in plum silk, with a pearl comb in her hair and displeasure gathered around her mouth. She was Rosamund's aunt by marriage, though she used the connection only when it helped her appear charitable. "Why are you still wearing that thing?" Rosamund glanced down at the apron. "Mrs. Alder asked me to see to the napkins after I finished Lady Honoria's hem. Mrs. Alder asks too much because you permit it." Lady Maribel's eyes lowered to the blue thread. "And you make yourself look like a maid because you have no instinct for position." The words struck an old bruise inside Rosamund, one too familiar to startle her. "I was told not to enter the drawing-room this evening." "You were told not to present yourself as a guest." Lady Maribel stepped closer, bringing with her the powdery scent of violets and calculation. "There is a difference, though I do not expect you to appreciate it. You may be needed, you are not to be seen." From the far end of the passage came a small gasp, quickly smothered. Nell, the youngest scullery maid, stood frozen with a tray of polished spoons. One silver spoon slid toward the edge. Rosamund reached out and caught it before it fell, then gave the girl the faintest nod. Nell's face, red from kitchen heat and fear, softened with gratitude. Lady Maribel noticed the exchange and frowned. Kindness in her house was acceptable only when it flowed downward from someone important enough to be praised for it. "The Duke of Alder-mere is expected before 8, she said. "The table must not be delayed. The sideboard must not be wanting. Honoria must not be troubled. If she needs a ribbon, a pin, a glass of ratafia, or her shawl, you will attend to her without fuss, but you will use the side passage. Do you understand?" Rosamund inclined her head. "Perfectly." Lady Maribel's expression tightened. "That tone. I meant no offense. You rarely do. That is the irritating part." She moved away, then paused. "And Rosamund, if any guest asks who you are my companion. Nothing more elaborate, nothing sentimental, nothing about your father." This time, Rosamund looked up. The name of her father entered the passage like a candle, suddenly snuffed. Why would anyone ask about him? Lady Maribel's eyes flickered. It was quick, but Rosamund had survived in that house by noticing quick things. No one will if you behave with sense. She turned and vanished toward the front hall, where the air was warmer and every voice was trained to sound pleased. Rosamund remained still for 3 breaths. Then she placed the rescued spoon back on Nell's tray. "There," she said softly. "No harm done," Nell whispered. "Thank you, miss. I thought Mrs. Alder would send me back to the scullery without supper. Then hold the tray with both hands and do not let Mr. Pike hurry you." "Yes, miss." The girl fled. Rosamund watched her go, feeling the small ache that always followed a small mercy. It did not change the world. It did not restore her father's house, or her mother's piano, or the blue velvet cloak sold after the funeral to pay a creditor who had bowed while taking it. But it kept one frightened girl from being blamed for a spoon. Some days, that was all dignity could afford, she returned to the linen closet to fetch the last stack of napkins. The closet smelled of lavender, starch, and locked secrets. On the upper shelf sat the cedar workbox that had belonged to her mother, the only possession Lady Maribel had not sold, because it looked too plain to be valuable. Rosamund should not have opened it. She knew that. She also knew that Lady Maribel had mentioned her father with fear, not grief, and fear left traces. With the dinner bell soon to ring, and every servant occupied, Rosamund lifted the lid. Inside lay old reels, a thimble, a packet of needles, and beneath the faded lining, a folded scrap of paper she did not remember seeing before. Her pulse changed, not raced, not yet. It simply became audible, a quiet insistence in her ears. She unfolded the scrap carefully. The paper had been torn from a larger sheet. Only a few words remained, written in her father's hand, unmistakably slanted and precise. "Alder-mere, trust, to be delivered if Maribel refuses." Below that, half a signature had been ripped away. Rosamund stared at the words until they seemed to shift in the dim light. Alder-mere. That was the Duke of Alder-mere's principal seat, the very Duke expected at Blythe House before 8. She folded the paper again and slipped it into the small inner pocket of her gown, beneath the apron. For a moment, she pressed her hand there, feeling the fragile edge through the cloth. A trust. Delivered if Maribel refuses. Refuses what? The question opened inside her with such force that the closet seemed too small to contain it. Footsteps sounded in the passage. Rosamund closed the workbox, took up the napkins, and stepped out just as Honoria swept toward her in pale green silk, all smooth shoulders, bright eyes, and triumph sharpened into beauty. "There you are," Honoria said. "Mama said you were lurking. I was fetching the napkins." "Of course you were. You are always fetching something." It must be comforting to have a purpose. Rosamund held the folded linen against her side. It is more comforting than having only an audience. Honoria's smile froze. Then it returned, sweeter and more dangerous. "Take care, cousin. Wit looks charming on a woman who can afford it. On you, it looks like ingratitude." She reached forward and touched the mended tear in Rosamund's apron. Her gloved finger paused on the blue stitches. "How touching. You have tried to improve it. I have tried to keep it from worsening. Some things worsen because they were never fine to begin with." Honoria leaned closer. "The Duke is scarred, you know. They say he came back from the war with half his face ruined and all his manners turned to iron. Mama thinks he will prefer a woman who does not flinch. I think he will prefer a woman who does not remind him of kitchens." Rosamund felt the words land. She did not let them remain. "Then you have nothing to fear from me." Honoria laughed under her breath. "No, I do not." From the front of the house came the deep roll of carriage wheels over gravel. Then another sound followed, lower and more final, the iron knock of the front door. Every servant in the passage seemed to pause at once. Even Honoria turned her head, her expression brightening with ambition. Lady Maribel's voice floated from the hall, suddenly warm enough to fool a stranger. His Grace, the Duke of Alder-mere. Rosamund stood with napkins in her arms, a torn apron at her waist, and her father's hidden words against her heart. For the first time all evening, she forgot to lower her eyes. The Duke of Alder-mere entered Blythe House, as if he had already judged it, and found it too eager to please. The footman announced him in a voice that tried not to tremble, and every conversation in the front hall softened at once, not into silence, but into the polite hush society used when it wished to stare without appearing vulgar. Rosamund stood partly hidden near the side passage, the napkins still in her arms, and the scrap of her father's writing warm against her heart. She had expected a grand man. She had expected height, rank, dark evening clothes, perhaps the remote arrogance that men acquired when rooms parted for them from birth. She had not expected the stillness. His Grace Cassian Vane, Duke of Alder-mere, did not move like a man anxious to be admired. He surrendered his hat and gloves with controlled economy, then lifted his face to the light of the hall chandelier. A thin scar crossed from his left temple down along the cheekbone, pale against his skin, too visible to ignore and too private to discuss. Several guests tried not to look. That made them look longer. Lady Maribel recovered first. She swept forward with a smile so warm that Rosamund almost admired the labor of it. "Your Grace, Blythe House is honored beyond measure." The Duke bowed with exact courtesy. "Lady Maribel." His voice was low, even, and without any hunger for welcome. Honoria stepped into the candlelight in her pale green silk, her chin lifted at the perfect angle between modesty and invitation. "Your Grace, we feared the northern roads might delay you." "They did. Then we are fortunate." "Are you?" The question was calm, not rude, but Honoria blinked as though a fan had shut sharply in her face. A few guests smiled into their gloves. Rosamund lowered her gaze too late. The Duke's eyes had already passed over the hall and reached the side passage. For one suspended instant, he saw her. Not the basket, not the apron, not the plain grey gown altered from another woman's cast-off. Her Rosamund felt it with such force that her fingers tightened around the napkins. Most people glanced at her as one noticed a chair left slightly out of place. His gaze paused as if he had found a question. Then Lady Maribel shifted, blocking the line between them. "We have gathered only a modest party," she said. "A few neighbours, Sir Edmund Rookley, my daughter, and my niece, who assists me in the house." Rosamund heard the small edit. Not companion now. Not guest. Assists. The Duke turned his attention back to Lady Maribel. "Your niece has a name, I presume." Lady Maribel's smile did not falter, but Rosamund saw the strain beneath it. "Miss Vale." "A quiet creature. Most useful to me. Usefulness seems to be highly valued here." The Duke's tone remained unreadable. "In a household, certainly." Lady Maribel lowered her voice, unaware that marble and old wood carried words in disobedient ways. "Not tonight, Honoria. Not with the Vale Trust unsettled." Rosamund nearly moved. The napkins shifted in her arms. Honoria's head turned sharply toward her mother, but Lady Maribel was already guiding the Duke toward the drawing room. Cassian Vane did not look back. Still, Rosamund had the uneasy conviction that he had heard every word. Dinner began with the practiced brilliance of people who believed etiquette could polish away motive. The dining room glowed with candles reflected in silver covers and glass. Rosamund was not seated. She stood behind the screen near the service door, with a small tray of extra pins, ribbons, and folded linen, exactly where Lady Maribel had ordered her to remain. She could hear the rise and fall of conversation, the rustle of silk. the faint musical clink of spoons against porcelain. The Duke sat at Lady Maribel's right. Honoria sat close enough across the table to make every turn of her head appear accidental. Sir Edmund Rookley, a handsome baronet with pale lashes and a smile too quick to be kind, had been placed near Honoria and seemed determined to amuse her at someone else's expense. Rosamund tried to think only of the scrap of paper. Alder-mere, trust, refuses. The words repeated themselves beneath the conversation, like a second dinner taking place in the dark. Then Honoria laughed. It was not a sound of surprise. It was a signal. Oh, how careless of me. A glass had tipped near her plate, spilling dark sauce across the edge of her pale green skirt. The damage was minor. Her expression suggested tragedy. Lady Maribel looked toward the screen. Miss Vale. Rosamund stepped out before she could be summoned twice. Every head turned, some politely, some with relief at a diversion. She crossed the room with the tray in steady hands. The heat of the candles touched her face. The linen apron, hastily mended and still tied around her waist, seemed suddenly brighter than any jewel in the room. "A cloth, Miss Vale," Honoria said, her eyes shining. "And perhaps your clever little pins. You are so good at repairs." Of course, Rosamund knelt at a safe distance and blotted the edge of the gown with care. She did not touch Honoria more than necessary. She did not look at the guests. Silence thickened, then frayed. Someone whispered. Someone else made the mistake of a soft laugh. Sir Edmund leaned back in his chair, observing her as if she were a street performer hired for supper. "Lady Maribel, you keep remarkable entertainment. Most houses employ musicians. You have an apron, girl." A few guests laughed, too quietly to own the cruelty, and loudly enough to feed it. Rosamund kept her hand steady, the sauce lifted from the silk. One pin slid from the tray. She caught it before it fell, just as she had caught Nell's spoon earlier. Honoria saw the movement and smiled down at her. "Careful, Rosamund." "We wouldn't want anyone to think you nervous." Rosamund rose. "There is no stain that will remain if it is treated quickly." "How practical," Sir Edmund said. "One can always trust people of reduced circumstances to understand stains." Lady Maribel's fan opened. "Sir Edmund, you are wicked." "Am I? I thought I was complimentary." "Miss Vale has a talent. Not every young lady can make poverty so useful." The laugh that followed was slightly larger. It moved around the table like a draught. Rosamund set the cloth back upon the tray. She had been insulted before in smaller rooms, by fewer voices, without witnesses noble enough to make the injury fashionable. This was different. This had shape. It was meant to place her, to fix her forever in the space between family and servant, between name and need. She turned to leave by the service door. One moment. The Duke's voice did not rise. It did not need to. The laughter stopped as if a string had been cut. Rosamund remained where she was, still holding the tray. Cassian Vane looked first at Sir Edmund, then at Lady Maribel, and finally at Rosamund. In the candlelight, the scar along his cheek appeared whiter, not uglier, but more severe. "Miss Vale, were you summoned as a guest or as a servant?" Lady Maribel's fan stilled. "Your Grace, there is no need to trouble yourself with household arrangements. I did not ask you." No one breathed loudly. Honoria's lips parted, then closed. Sir Edmund studied his wine as if it had become deeply interesting. The Duke's gaze remained on Rosamund. It was not pity that unsettled her most. Pity always bent downward. This look stood level. Rosamund knew the answer Lady Maribel wished her to give. She knew the answer that would cost least. She also knew the scrap of paper in her pocket had already changed the cost of silence. Her fingers tightened once around the edge of the tray, then relaxed. "I was summoned because I was useful," she said. The words crossed the table without trembling. Lady Maribel went pale beneath her powder. The Duke rose so quietly that his chair barely sounded against the carpet. "Then Blythe House has mistaken usefulness for permission." Sir Edmund gave a brittle little laugh. "Your Grace, surely you don't mean to make a philosophy of an apron?" Cassian turned his head. The room seemed to shrink around that scarred, controlled face. "I mean to learn why a gentlewoman is being laughed at for doing work this house was content to require of her." Rosamund felt the tray grow heavy in her hands. Somewhere behind the screen, a servant drew in a breath and held it. Honoria's cheeks flushed with anger now, not embarrassment. Lady Maribel set down her fan. "Miss Vale is my companion," she said. "She is treated with every consideration suitable to her situation." The Duke looked at Rosamund again. "And what is her situation?" No one answered. That was the answer. No one answered because the truth had entered the room before anyone had dressed it for company. Rosamund stood beneath the chandelier with a tray in her hands, the mended apron at her waist, and the full weight of 12 pairs of eyes settling on her like dust. Lady Maribel's silence was not confusion. It was calculation interrupted too suddenly to recover its shape. Honoria looked from her mother to the Duke, and for the first time that evening, her beauty did not command the room. It merely occupied it. Sir Edmund Rookley tapped one finger against his wineglass, as if he could restore laughter by reminding everyone it had existed a moment before. "Your Grace," he said lightly, "surely this is too solemn a turn for dinner. Miss Vale is not injured. She has been teased no more." Cassian Vane did not move quickly. That made the room fear him more. He stepped away from his chair, crossed the carpet, and came to stand beside Rosamund. Not in front of her. Not between her and the guests as if she were a child frightened by shadows. Beside her. The space he took altered every other space in the room. A woman in an apron and a scarred Duke in black evening dress now stood on the same side of the table, and the arrangement was so improper to certain minds that it became almost magnificent. Rosamund felt the warmth of his presence near her sleeve. He did not touch her. He did not need to. "If Miss Vale is to be judged by the cloth she wears," he said, his gaze passing over the faces at the table, "then this room may judge me by my scars." The silence that followed had no politeness in it. It was the silence of people who had been caught looking through a keyhole. Sir Edmund's smile vanished first. Lady Maribel's hand closed over her fan, until the painted ivory ribs pressed against her glove. Honoria's eyes flashed with something sharper than embarrassment. "Your Grace," Lady Maribel said, "you mistake a family familiarity for insult." "Do I? Rosamund understands our ways. Miss Vale may understand them too well." His voice did not rise. It cut more cleanly because of that. Rosamund could feel every guest waiting for her to blush, stammer, protest, or rescue Lady Maribel with gratitude. She had done all those things at different times in that house. She had paid rent in apologies. She had made peace with indignity because peace had seemed cheaper than conflict. But the scrap of her father's paper lay against her heart, and the Duke had spoken her name as if it belonged to her. Slowly, Rosamund set the tray upon the nearest side table. The tiny sound of silver against wood carried across the room. She untied the apron. Her fingers did not hurry. The blue thread glimmered near the pocket, a small stubborn line of order against worn linen. Honoria made a soft sound of disbelief. "Rosamund, don't be theatrical." "I am not." Rosamund folded the apron once, then again, and laid it beside the tray. "I am making myself less useful for the remainder of dinner." A breath moved around the table. It was almost a gasp, but better bred, and therefore less honest. Lady Maribel rose halfway. "You forget yourself." Rosamund looked at her. "No, Aunt. I believe I am beginning to remember." The words were quiet. That was why they landed. Cassian's expression did not change. but something in his eyes sharpened with approval. He turned to Lady Maribel. "There is an empty chair." That chair was reserved for Mrs. Pemberton, who was unable to attend. "Then Mrs. Pemberton will not mind." Sir Edmund gave a dry laugh. "Are we to reset the table, because a poor relation has become interesting?" Cassian looked at him. "No. You are to remember that you are speaking in the presence of a duke, and more importantly, in the presence of a lady." Sir Edmund coloured, not deeply. Men like him practiced shallow shame, the kind that could be washed away with port. "I meant no offence. That is often said by those who have meant it with care." The footman nearest the wall stood rigid, uncertain whether to move without Lady Maribel's permission. Cassian addressed him without taking his eyes from Sir Edmund. "A chair for Miss Vale." Lady Maribel's mouth opened. Then she remembered who he was. A duke did not outrank decency, but he outranked every excuse she owned. "Thomas," she said, her voice thin, "do as his grace requests." The footman brought the empty chair. Rosamund watched it approach with a feeling she could not immediately name. It was not triumph. Triumph was louder, brighter, easier to understand. This was more dangerous. Recognition. The chair was placed not at the far end, near the younger gentleman, not beside the sideboard where embarrassment could be hidden, but between Lady Fenwick, a widowed neighbour with silver hair and watchful eyes, and a vacant place near the Duke's original seat. Cassian moved the chair himself by half an inch, enough to give Rosamund room to sit without brushing against the table leg. It was a small courtesy. "Miss Vale," he said, "you may refuse if you wish." That was the most astonishing thing he had said yet. Not command, not rescue. Permission. Lady Maribel's gaze burned. Honoria's anger polished itself into a smile. Sir Edmund looked as though he had swallowed a fishbone. Rosamund knew what acceptance would cost. By morning, every house within 10 miles would know she had been raised from the service door by the scarred Duke of Alder-mere. Some would call it charity. Some would call it scandal. Honoria would call it theft. Lady Maribel would call it ingratitude. But if Rosamund refused, she would return to the passage, and every blue stitch in the apron would become a confession that she had been offered dignity and had not dared take it. She crossed to the chair. Lady Fenwick inclined her head, not warmly, but properly. Properly was enough. Rosamund sat. The room had to rearrange itself around the fact of her presence. No one knew how to continue. That was the first gift. The second came when Cassian returned to his seat, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, which made it impossible for anyone else to treat it as a spectacle without exposing themselves. Dinner resumed in pieces. A fork lifted here, a throat cleared there. Lady Maribel asked Lady Fenwick about her roses, though roses had no business surviving such tension. Honoria began speaking to Sir Edmund with exaggerated ease, but her eyes kept sliding toward Rosamund. Cassian ate little. He listened. Once, when a footman came too quickly with a sauce boat, Rosamund moved her glass out of the way before it could be knocked. Cassian noticed. Of course he did. He seemed to notice the hidden architecture of every room, the fault lines beneath polished manners. "You have quick hands, Miss Vale," Lady Fenwick observed. Rosamund answered carefully. "One learns to prevent accidents when one is blamed for them." Lady Fenwick's eyes softened by a fraction. Indeed, across the table, Honoria laughed too brightly. Rosamund exaggerates. She has always had a poetic way of presenting inconvenience as tragedy. Cassian set down his knife. "Has she? Oh, yes. She was quite indulged before my dear mother took her in." Lady Maribel's warning glance came too late. A gentleman's daughter, raised with more books than sense. Misfortune is always harder on those who were not prepared for usefulness. Rosamund felt the old humiliation stir. She folded her hands in her lap, where no one could see them tighten. My father believed usefulness was a virtue. A charming sentiment, Sir Edmund said. Did he also believe in paying his debts? The table stilled again. Lady Maribel's face went white. Not offended white, afraid white. Rosamund's hand moved almost without thought to the hidden pocket where the torn scrap rested. Alder-mere, trust. To be delivered if Maribel refuses. Cassian saw the movement. His gaze followed it, then lifted to her face. He did not ask. Not there, not before them. But something passed between them with the quiet force of a sealed letter. He had heard the word trust in the hall. He had seen Lady Maribel's fear. Now he had seen Rosamund protect a paper no one else knew existed. Honoria, sensing danger without understanding its shape, turned sweetly to the Duke. Your Grace, you must forgive us. Family histories are always tedious to outsiders. On the contrary, Cassian said. They often explain the present. The meal ended soon after, not because it was finished, but because Lady Maribel could no longer bear the risk of conversation. In the drawing room, coffee was served with forced cheer. Rosamund expected to be dismissed. Instead, Cassian approached her near the mantel, where she stood with Lady Fenwick close enough to satisfy propriety. His scar caught the firelight. Up close, it was not the ruin people whispered about. It was a record of survival. He bowed. Miss Vale, I owe you an apology. Rosamund looked up, startled. You owe me nothing, Your Grace. I allowed them to make a public matter of your dignity before I understood how long they had been practicing. The accuracy of it touched something raw. You understood sooner than most. That is not much praise. It is more than I am accustomed to giving. His mouth almost changed. Not a smile, but the idea of one restrained by habit. From across the room, Lady Maribel watched them as if every word were a coin being stolen from her purse. Cassian lowered his voice, still proper, still audible enough, not to be secret. May I call tomorrow morning? Rosamund knew the room had heard. Honoria certainly had. The colour left her cheeks, then returned in a rush. Lady Maribel moved as if to intervene, but Lady Fenwick spoke first. A formal morning call would be entirely proper, Your Grace, if Lady Maribel receives. Cassian did not look away from Rosamund. Then I shall leave my card. A footman approached with the silver tray. Cassian placed his calling card upon it. The white rectangle seemed small for the trouble it caused. Lady Maribel's fingers trembled when she accepted it. For one fleeting second, Rosamund saw not her aunt, not her keeper, but a woman terrified that a locked door had just been opened from the other side. Cassian bowed once more to Rosamund. Until tomorrow, Miss Vale. Your Grace. He left soon after, taking the air from the room with him. Only when the front door closed did Honoria cross the carpet, her voice low and bright with fury. What did you say to him? Rosamund looked down at the calling card in Lady Maribel's rigid hand. She thought of her father's torn words. She thought of blue thread. Very little, she said. That was the trouble. By 10 the next morning, Blythe House had learned to whisper around Rosamund, as if she had become a vase set too near the edge of a table. No one quite touched her. No one quite ignored her. The servants lowered their eyes with a new, nervous respect, and Lady Maribel looked at her over breakfast, as though trying to decide whether a locked drawer had somehow developed a key of its own. Honoria did not look at her at all, which was worse. Honoria ate a slice of toast in 3 precise bites, then said to her mother, "Perhaps His Grace has already forgotten the matter. Men of his rank enjoy making gestures. It doesn't mean they remember the people attached to them." "Eat your breakfast," Lady Maribel replied. Her voice was soft enough for company and sharp enough for family. Rosamund sat at the far end of the table, neither guest nor servant, with tea she had not poured for herself, because Mrs. Alder had done it before anyone could object. That small act had changed the temperature of the room. Rosamund felt it every time Lady Maribel's gaze fell upon the cup. The scrap of paper remained hidden inside Rosamund's bodice, stitched into a temporary fold of muslin before dawn. She had slept little. Alder-mere, trust, to be delivered if Maribel refuses. The words had followed her through the night, like a candle carried behind a closed door. She had asked herself 100 times what her father had tried to deliver, and why Lady Maribel had not wanted it delivered at all. At 10:30, the bell rang. It did not ring like an ordinary call. It rang with the terrible authority of fulfilled consequence. A footman entered the breakfast room with a card upon a small tray. His Grace, the Duke of Alder-mere, has called, my lady. Honoria's teacup touched its saucer too hard. Lady Maribel went very still. Already? Yes, my lady. His Grace waits in the front drawing room. Lady Maribel rose so quickly that her chair legs scraped the floor. Then she remembered dignity and slowed herself. Miss Vale, you will remain here. Rosamund set down her cup. His Grace left his card for me. His Grace left his card in my house. After asking if he might call, he asked under circumstances of public awkwardness. It would be charitable to spare him the consequences of his own gallantry. Honoria smiled without warmth. Mamma is right. You don't want to look too eager, Rosamund. Rosamund folded her hands in her lap. No, I only wish not to look cowardly. Lady Maribel's eyes flashed. You will not make a spectacle of this family. I did not begin the spectacle. For a moment the room held its breath. Then Lady Maribel stepped closer, lowering her voice. Listen to me. Whatever His Grace imagines he saw last night, he does not understand our arrangements. You are safe here, fed here, clothed here. Do not confuse one gentleman's curiosity with deliverance. Rosamund felt the old fear stir, that practical fear of roof, bread, and reputation. She did not despise it. Fear had kept her alive in quieter ways than courage ever could, but fear was not the same as truth. She rose. Then you may explain the arrangements in my presence. Lady Maribel stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Honoria's expression tightened into something brittle and bright. How quickly gratitude changes its gown. Rosamund looked at her cousin. Gratitude should not require one to disappear. She walked to the drawing room with Lady Maribel ahead of her, and Honoria. Behind, a formation that felt less like a family procession than an escort to judgment. Lady Fenwick had been invited early as a matter of propriety, and Rosamund saw with relief that the older widow was already seated near the window, her gloved hands folded over the head of her cane. Cassian Vane stood by the mantel, dressed in dark mourning clothes. Daylight made his scar plainer than candles had. It also made the attempts not to stare more shameful. He turned as Rosamund entered. His gaze moved over her face first, then to her hands, then back to her eyes, as if confirming that she had chosen to come rather than been sent. He bowed. Miss Vale, Your Grace. Lady Maribel placed herself slightly between them. How kind of you to call. Miss Vale is, as you see, quite recovered from last evening's little discomfort. Cassian looked at Lady Maribel. I am pleased to see Miss Vale. I am not pleased to hear her described as though she were furniture restored after a crack. Lady Fenwick coughed, once, which might have been a laugh if she had been a less disciplined woman. Honoria's cheeks coloured. Lady Maribel's smile held, but only because she had built it to withstand weather. You must forgive a mother's habit of smoothing disturbances. You are not Miss Vale's mother. The room cooled. Rosamund felt the sentence pass through it, like a blade sliding beneath ribbon. Lady Maribel recovered with effort. No, but I have stood in a position of care since her father's unfortunate death. Mr. Vale died how long ago? 6 years, Rosamund said before her aunt could answer. Cassian turned to her at once. And before that, where was your home? Near Ripon, a modest house called Briarcombe. It was sold to settle obligations after my father died. Lady Maribel's fingers tightened around the back of a chair. A necessary sorrow. Were all obligations settled? Cassian asked. Lady Maribel answered too quickly. Of course. Rosamund did not answer, Cassian noticed. Miss Vale? She felt the scrap of paper hidden against her. To speak of it now would be reckless. To lie would be worse. I was told they were settled. Told by whom? By Lady Maribel. Honoria gave a small laugh. Your Grace, you can hardly expect Rosamund to have understood such matters. Papa always said she had more tenderness than judgment. Your father is not here. Cassian's voice remained calm. Miss Vale is. Honoria's smile died. Lady Maribel moved to the tea table. This is becoming rather severe for a morning call. Tea, Your Grace. No, thank you. Then perhaps you will allow me to say plainly that Miss Vale's situation is not mysterious. She is a young woman of reduced means. We received her. We gave her a place. Society is not always gentle with young women who have none. Did you give her a place, or did you keep her in one? Rosamund looked down because she did not trust her face. No one had ever placed the question so exactly. Lady Maribel's voice softened, becoming more dangerous. You saw a moment of household informality and have mistaken yourself for her champion. No. Cassian looked at Rosamund again. I have mistaken nothing. I have questions. Rosamund lifted her eyes. About what, Your Grace? About your father. About Alder-mere. And about why the word trust causes such distress in this room. Lady Maribel's teapot struck the saucer with a sharp sound. Honoria turned her head. Lady Fenwick's eyes narrowed, alert now. Rosamund did not move, but she felt the paper beneath her gown as if it had grown warm. Alder-mere? She asked quietly. My principal's seat, Cassian said. My late mother kept certain family papers there. Some touched upon neighboring families, dependents, old obligations, and matters of trust. The name Vale is not unfamiliar. Lady Maribel gave a little laugh. How extraordinary. There must have been many Vales. Not many connected to a gentleman named Elias Vale, I think. Rosamund's breath stopped. Her father's name had not been spoken in that house with respect for years. Cassian said it as if it deserved a chair of its own. You knew my father? No, but I know the name of the solicitor who wrote to him. Lady Maribel's face changed before she could prevent it. Cassian saw, so did Rosamund. Mr. Peregrine Shaw, he said. Does that name mean anything to you, Miss Vale? Lady Maribel stood. This is improper. No, Lady Fenwick said from the window. Her voice was dry and perfectly placed. It is awkward. Those are often confused by people with reasons to avoid questions. Rosamund turned to Cassian. She could feel Honoria watching, waiting to punish whatever hope showed on her face. I have seen no letter from Mr. Shaw. Then perhaps one failed to reach you. Lady Maribel's voice sharpened. Or perhaps there was no reason a young woman without property should trouble herself over documents beyond her understanding. Cassian stepped no closer, but his attention made distance irrelevant. Miss Vale, I will not ask you to disclose private family matters before those who may have an interest in shaping them. I will ask only this. If Mr. Shaw were to call upon you, properly and in the presence of a suitable chaperone, would you receive him? Rosamund heard the offer beneath the formality. Not rescue, access. A door opened without being shoved. She thought of Lady Maribel saying useful. She thought of Honoria touching the torn apron as if poverty were contagious. She thought of her father's handwriting, reduced to a torn scrap because someone had wanted the rest gone. Yes, she said. I would receive him. Rosamund, Lady Maribel warned. Rosamund did not look away from the Duke. I would receive him, Your Grace. Something in Cassian's expression eased, though only slightly. Then I shall write to him today. Honoria stepped forward. And what precisely do you expect to find? A fortune hidden under a cushion? A cottage? A scandal? It's absurd. Cassian glanced at her. Absurd things are often kept hidden, because sensible ones can survive daylight. He bowed to Lady Fenwick, then to Lady Maribel with exact and chilly courtesy. Last, he bowed to Rosamund. Until we meet again, Miss Vale. After I left, the drawing-room seemed smaller and less honest. Lady Fenwick remained long enough to make anger difficult, then took her leave with a promise to call again. Only when the front door closed did Lady Maribel turn. You foolish girl. Rosamund stood near the tea-table, her hands cold, her heart steady. What did Mr. Shaw write to my father? Lady Maribel's eyes hardened. You will not mention that name again. Then there was a letter. Honoria moved toward the door. Mamma, don't answer her. Lady Maribel did not. She crossed the room, took the ring of keys from her chatelaine, and walked into the little sitting room beyond. Rosamund followed far enough to see her open the cabinet where family papers were kept. Inside sat the cedar workbox that had belonged to Rosamund's mother, removed from the linen closet. Lady Maribel placed it behind a stack of ledgers, shut the cabinet, and locked it. The click was small. It sounded final. Rosamund looked at the locked door, then at the woman who held the key. Lady Maribel spoke without turning. Some truths destroy women who are vain enough to chase them. Rosamund touched the hidden fold of muslin, where her father's torn words rested. Then I shall have to learn whether I am vain or only tired of being lied to. That night Rosamund learned that a locked cabinet could make more noise in a house than any raised voice. It waited. Beyond the little sitting room, plain mahogany by daylight and almost black by candlelight, with Lady Maribel's keys safely hidden at her waist, and Rosamund's mother's cedar workbox trapped behind. Ledgers that had never concerned her until someone decided she must never touch them. Blythe House slept badly after the Duke's call. Doors closed with care. Footsteps paused outside rooms. Honoria laughed too loudly in the corridor with her maid, then went silent the moment Rosamund passed. By midnight, the house had settled into that uneasy quiet kept by places full of servants who knew more than they were paid to say. Rosamund lay awake for nearly an hour before she rose, wrapped a shawl around her plain nightgown, and took the candle from her washstand. She did not go to the cabinet. Lady Maribel would expect that. Instead, she went down the back stairs to the linen room, where old records of sheets, blankets, household repairs, and forgotten trunks were kept because no one considered linen dangerous. Mrs. Alder, the housekeeper, was there already, seated at the work table with an account book open and spectacles low on her nose. She did not startle when Rosamund entered. She only closed the book. I wondered when you would come, miss. Rosamund stopped at the threshold. You know why I am here. I know why you ought to be, Mrs. Alder's face had the tired caution of a woman who had served respectability long enough to distrust it. Shut the door. Rosamund obeyed. The linen room smelled of lavender and starch, the same scents that had clung to her mother's workbox. For a moment, grief rose so quickly she nearly mistook it for fear. Lady Maribel has taken my mother's box, she said. Aye. Did she know something was hidden in it? Her ladyship has known many things and admitted fewer, Mrs. Alder pushed a folded towel aside and drew out a small bundle of household labels tied with thread. Your father sent a packet here once. Not to this house by choice, I think. It came after his fever took hold, when his writing had gone unsteady. I was under laundry maid then, but I remember because Lady Maribel opened it in this very room. She thought no one saw. Rosamund's hand tightened around the candle. What was in it? Papers. A strip of linen tied round them, blue thread through the seal. I had never seen a gentleman bind legal papers like mending, but Lady Maribel turned white when she saw it. Blue thread. The words seemed to pass through Rosamund's body, touching every place where she had been taught to accept not knowing. Did you read anything? No, miss. I could barely read then, and it would not have been my place. But I saw the name Alder-mere. I saw the late Duchess of Alder-mere's crest, stamped in wax. Lady Maribel told me if I spoke of it, I would lose my position without character. Mrs. Alder's mouth tightened. A servant without character has no roof within 10 miles. Rosamund sat because her knees had lost their certainty. Why tell me now? Mrs. Alder looked toward the door. Because last night His Grace stood beside you in a room full of people who expected you to stand alone. That changes what is possible. The kindness in the words hurt more than pity would have. Rosamund set the candle down. Do you think the packet is still here? No, I think her ladyship moved it years ago or destroyed what she dared. But I kept one thing. She untied the bundle and took out a laundry tag, old and yellowed, with 2 words written in faded ink. Vale packet. Beneath it was a date from 6 years ago. It is not proof of much, Mrs. Alder said, but it proves something came. Rosamund took the tag as if it were a relic. Mrs. Alder, I cannot ask you to risk your place. You did not ask. The housekeeper rose, gathering her account book, and you were kind to Nell yesterday, when you might have thought only of yourself. That matters below stairs, even if drawing rooms pretend not to see it. Rosamund folded the tag into the same hidden place where she kept her father's torn scrap. Thank you, Mrs. Alder gave a small, brisk nod, as though gratitude embarrassed her. Be careful, miss. Lady Honoria has been asking which servants like you best. That never means anything good. Before dawn had fully lifted the grey from the window panes, a different candle burned 20 miles away at Alder-mere Hall, where Cassian Vane stood in the old muniment room with his steward, Mr. Keene, and a stack of family papers that smelled of dust, leather, and extinguished fires. Alder-mere was larger than Blythe House and older in its silences. Its walls did not flatter guests. They endured them. Cassian had returned late the previous evening and slept poorly, as old wounds did not care for long rides or colder weather. His left hand ached, the fingers stiff from the old injury, but he forced them open and reached for another packet. Your Grace, Mr. Keene said, the late Duchess's charitable papers are mostly arranged by parish and year. If the name Vale is there, it may take hours. Then we shall spend hours. Of course, Your Grace. The steward hesitated. May I ask whether this concerns Miss Vale of Blythe House? Cassian looked up. Mr. Keene had served his mother and knew the difference between curiosity and duty. It may. Then I should say I remember the name. Her mother, Mrs. Vale, was born Miss Amabel Harrow. She spent some months at Alder-mere Cottage before her marriage. The late Duchess was fond of her. Cassian went still. Alder-mere Cottage. Yes, Your Grace. It has been empty for years. Cassian drew another paper toward him. Beneath a faded list of pension payments for wounded men lay a small envelope marked in his mother's hand, Harrow Vale Matter. He opened it with care. Inside was not the original packet, but a scrap of linen no wider than 3 inches, threaded with blue stitches and sealed at one corner with broken wax bearing the edge of the Vane crest. Cassian stared at it. The memory of Rosamund's apron returned with uncomfortable clarity, the neat blue mending near the pocket, the way she had folded it as if refusing to let shame handle it any longer. Mr. Keene leaned closer, then drew back. That is unusual. Yes, Cassian's voice was quiet. It is. There was a note folded with the linen, written by his mother to herself in the year before her death. If Mr. Elias Vale should fail to receive acknowledgement from Lady Maribel Blythe, Mr. Shaw must be consulted before any trusteeship is accepted as settled. Cassian read the line twice. He had disliked Lady Maribel before. Dislike was now becoming a colder thing. "Send for Mr. Shaw," he said, "and have a formal invitation written to Miss Vale. She is to come to Alder-mere Hall to assist with the wounded soldiers' relief accounts. Lady Fenwick may attend as chaperone if Lady Maribel objects." Mr. Keene lowered his head. "Yes, Your Grace." Cassian placed the blue-threaded linen on the table, away from the dust. He did not touch his scar, though he felt the old pull of it, as he always did when anger asked for expression. Last night, Miss Vale had looked at his damaged face and not made it a tragedy. She had looked at his hand when it stiffened around his knife, and had looked away with kindness, not discomfort. That restraint deserved something better than admiration. It deserved action. By noon, the invitation reached Blythe House on thick cream paper, carried by a groom in Alder-mere livery. Lady Maribel read it in the morning room, while Honoria stood at her shoulder. Rosamund waited near the window, her plain sewing untouched in her lap. She knew before her aunt spoke that the world had shifted again, because Lady Maribel looked at the paper as though it had accused her aloud. "His Grace invites you to Alder-mere Hall," Lady Maribel said, "to assist with charitable accounts. How very generous of him to invent a task." Honoria laughed softly. "Perhaps he collects damaged things." Rosamund folded her sewing with steady hands. "Perhaps he values useful ones." Lady Maribel's eyes lifted. "You will not go." Rosamund felt the laundry tag and her father's scrap hidden beneath her bodice. Fear rose. Then the memory of Mrs. Alder's tired courage rose beside it. "If Lady Fenwick agrees to chaperone me, I will go." "You forget who shelters you." "No," Rosamund said. "I am beginning to learn who has not." Lady Maribel looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned the invitation face down, but not before Rosamund saw the final line, written in the Duke's severe hand, beneath the formal wording. "Miss Vale's judgment in matters of order and repair has already proved superior to that of the room that mocked her." Honoria did not see the line. Lady Maribel did. Her mouth tightened. For the first time since Rosamund had entered Blythe House 6 years before, her aunt had nothing ready to say. Alder-mere Hall did not ask Rosamund Vale to make herself smaller. That was the first shock. The second came when the great front doors opened, and the housekeeper addressed her by name before anyone had a chance to decide whether she belonged. "Miss Vale, Lady Fenwick, His Grace is expecting you in the estate office, Mrs. Wren," a tall woman with silver at her temples and keys at her waist, spoke with the composed authority of a general disguised in black silk. She did not glance at Rosamund's plain travelling gown as if measuring its cost. She did not look behind her for Lady Maribel's permission. She simply led them across a flagstone hall where old portraits watched from dark panels, and the air smelled faintly of beeswax, rain, and wood smoke. Lady Fenwick walked beside Rosamund, with her cane tapping once every 3 steps. "Breathe, child," she murmured. "It's only a house." Rosamund looked at the carved staircase, the worn stone lions. Near the hearth, the long corridor opening toward rooms older than anyone's gossip, and answered softly, "It knows it is not." Lady Fenwick's mouth twitched. "Good. Neither should you." The estate office stood at the rear of the house, not in a glittering drawing room, but in a practical chamber with tall windows overlooking wet lawns and a line of grey hills beyond. Ledgers lay open on a wide table. Maps of tenant farms and parish boundaries hung on one wall. There was a second chair already set near the centre, not at the edge, not by the door, not where a useful poor relation could be placed and forgotten. Beside it lay a sharpened pencil, a clean blotter, and a stack of papers tied with green tape. His Grace Cassian Vane stood near the window with Mr. Keene, his steward. He turned when she entered. Daylight was honest with his scar, It made no cruelty of it. It merely showed that something had happened to him, and that he had survived with his posture unbowed. "Miss Vale," he said, bowing. "Lady Fenwick, thank you for coming." Lady Fenwick settled herself near the hearth without ceremony. "I came to prevent impropriety, and to be entertained." "Don't disappoint me, Your Grace." Cassian's eyes altered almost imperceptibly. Rosamund suspected that, in another life, it might have been a smile. "I shall endeavor to satisfy both duties." He drew out the chair for Rosamund, then stepped back. He did not hover. He did not guide her hand to the table as if she were fragile. The choice to sit remained hers. That made her hesitate more than a command would have. Then she sat, and the room accepted the fact without trembling. Mr. Keene placed the first ledger before her. "These are the wounded soldiers' relief accounts, Miss Vale. His Grace's late mother founded the subscription, and the estate continues it. We have found inconsistencies in several entries connected to payments passing through local trustees." "May I ask what sort of inconsistencies?" Rosamund said. "Small ones," Mr. Keene replied. "Which is why they have lasted." Cassian's gaze sharpened at the answer, but he let the steward continue. Rosamund opened the ledger. Numbers calmed her, they always had. Words could be twisted by rank, softened by manners, or sharpened into insult. Figures were quieter and less forgiving. She moved down the page, tracing dates, initials, parish names, and disbursements. For a time, the only sounds were Lady Fenwick's cane shifting, the faint crackle of the fire, and the scratch of Rosamund's pencil on paper. "This column does not match the receipts," she said at last. Mr. Keene leaned forward. "Where?" She turned the ledger slightly. "Here. The payment to 2 pensioners in March is entered as £12, but the receipt below records 8. The same hand writes both amounts, but the ink is different. The larger number was added later." Mr. Keene looked at Cassian. "I missed that. You were meant to," Rosamund said, then stopped, aware she had spoken too directly. "Forgive me. For accuracy?" Cassian asked. "No." Heat touched her face. "For presumption. Presume again." The words were quiet, almost dry, and unexpectedly kind. Rosamund lowered her eyes to the page before his regard could unsettle her. She turned another sheet. The initials beside the altered entries are M.B. Lady Fenwick's head lifted. "Mr." Keene went still. Cassian did not. "Lady Maribel Blythe," he said. Rosamund kept reading, because if she looked at him, she might lose the thin line of composure that had brought her this far. "There is another notation. Vale Trust transfer, held pending household settlement." The room changed. Not loudly. There were no gasps, no shattered teacups, no dramatic declarations. Yet every person in it understood that the words had opened a door. Lady Fenwick spoke first. "Household settlement is a generous phrase when a young woman has been wearing another lady's discarded gowns." Rosamund's pencil stilled. Cassian looked at the page, then at her. "Miss Vale, have you ever been told that money from any trust passed through Lady Maribel's hands?" "No, Your Grace." "Have you signed any paper consenting to such an arrangement?" "No." "Were you asked to approve?" "How any funds connected to your name were used?" "No." The third answer was harder than the first two. It sounded too much like an inventory of erasure. Cassian's left hand rested on the table. The injured fingers did not close properly, and for one brief second, Rosamund saw the effort it cost him not to make a fist. She looked away, not from disgust, but because dignity sometimes required privacy even in plain sight. When she glanced back, his expression had changed. He had noticed her not noticing. "Mr. Keene," he said, "mark every entry with those initials. Miss Vale, if you are willing, I should like your review of the remaining pages." Rosamund drew herself straighter. "I am willing, then your judgment has authority in this room." It was a simple sentence. It rearranged 6 years, Mrs. Wren entered soon after with tea, and Rosamund braced for the old awkwardness of servants, wondering whether to treat her as company or convenience. It did not come. The housekeeper set a cup beside her first, then offered sugar as she would to any invited lady. "Thank you," Rosamund said. Mrs. Wren inclined her head. Miss Vale, no pity, no curiosity. Just her name. Rosamund had to look back at the ledger quickly. Tenderness was more dangerous when it arrived without warning. The work continued for nearly an hour before carriage wheels sounded in the drive. Mr. Keene glanced toward the window. Mrs. Wren returned to the threshold with a displeasure too well trained to show itself fully. "Lady Marable Blythe and Lady Honoria Blythe have called, Your Grace." Cassian's face cooled. Lady Fenwick muttered, "How industrious of them." Rosamund's hand moved toward the ledger, as if she could shield the page with her palm. Cassian saw it. "The papers remain on the table," he said. "No one removes them." Lady Marable entered with Honoria at her side, both dressed for a morning call that had been chosen to look accidental. Honoria's gown was pale blue, delicate as a compliment, and just as calculated. Her gaze went first to Rosamund, seated at the estate table, then to the cup beside her, then to the open ledger. For an instant, hatred showed through the polish. Lady Marable recovered faster. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. We were driving nearby and thought to inquire after Miss Vale." "How considerate," Cassian said. His voice made the compliment unusable. Honoria smiled. "Rosamund looks quite established." "How quickly she takes to important rooms." "Some people do," Lady Fenwick said, "especially when they have been kept out of them too long." Lady Marable ignored her. "My niece is inexperienced in estate matters. I hope she has not troubled Mr. Keene with fanciful conclusions." Rosamund felt the old instinct to retreat. Then she looked at the ledger and saw the initials again, MB. She placed one finger lightly beside the entry. "I have asked questions only where the numbers disagree." Honoria laughed. "Numbers can be made to disagree if one wants significance badly enough." "So can people," Rosamund said. Cassian's eyes moved to her face. Approval did not soften him, it steadied him. Lady Marable stepped closer to the table. "These accounts are not your concern. They bear my name. A name does not confer rank." Honoria's smile sharpened. "Nor can rank be embroidered back once torn." The words were meant to drag Rosamund back to the apron, to the service passage, to the laughter that had made a room feel briefly pleased with itself. Rosamund felt the sting. She also felt the chair beneath her, the pencil in her hand, the Duke standing not before her, but near enough that retreat was no longer the only path. "No," she said. "But truth can be mended if someone not kept the thread." Lady Marable's face changed. Only a little. Enough. Cassian noticed. Mr. Keene noticed. Lady Fenwick certainly noticed. Honoria, sensing the shift, turned bright again. "How poetic! You must bring that spirit to the Harrogate Charity Assembly tomorrow. Everyone will be eager to see what His Grace has discovered in you." "Honoria," Lady Marable warned.
"Oh, Mama, I'm only extending an invitation."
Honoria looked at Rosamund. "You will come, won't you?" It would be ungracious to hide after receiving so much attention. Rosamund understood the trap even before she saw Lady Marable's silence. Approve it. A public room. A charity crowd. Smiles sharpened for sport. Cassian looked at her, waiting, not answering for her. The choice stood between them, frightening and clean. "Yes," Rosamund said. "I will come." Honoria's smile bloomed. "Excellent." Cassian closed the ledger with one controlled motion. "Then Alder-mere will attend as well." Honoria's smile faltered. Lady Marable looked toward the closed ledger, as if it had begun to breathe. Rosamund sat very still, her hands folded over the pencil. She had entered Alder-mere Hall as a woman invited to assist. She would leave it as a woman someone had tried to warn. someone others had tried to frighten, and someone who now knew that her name had been written into accounts long before she had ever been allowed to read them. Harrogate had dressed itself in charity, which meant every cruelty in the assembly rooms wore gloves. The long hall shone with lamps and polished floors, and the tables along the walls had been arranged with embroidered purses, folded shawls, painted fans, and little baskets of donated linen meant to help soldiers who had returned from war with less than they had given. Rosamund arrived with Lady Fenwick shortly after 4, wearing her plain grey gown, freshly brushed, and a narrow ribbon at her throat, because Lady Fenwick had insisted that courage did not forbid neatness. The room turned toward her in pieces, a head inclined here, a whisper caught there. Several ladies looked at her gown, then past her shoulder, searching for the Duke. They did not have to search long. Cassian Vane entered behind them, with Mr. Keene, his dark coat severe against the pale chatter of the room. The scar along his face made the curious look quickly away. His presence made them look back again. Rosamund had thought she would feel safer when he arrived. Instead, she felt more visible. That was not the same thing. Honoria stood near the central table in blue silk, radiant as winter sunlight on ice. Sir Edmund Rookley was at her side, holding a glass of lemonade he had not tasted. Lady Marrable presided near the donation bar biscuits, with an expression of generous sorrow, as though poverty itself had written to thank her. "Miss Vale," Honoria called, loud enough to turn a dozen heads. "How kind of you to come. We were just arranging the household donations." Rosamund crossed the room with Lady Fenwick beside her and Cassian several paces behind, close enough to be known, distant enough not to claim her words. "I am pleased to assist where I may," Rosamund said. "Oh, I am sure you are." Honoria's smile widened. "You have always had such a gift for making old things useful." A few ladies smiled politely, uncertain whether they had been invited into a joke. Rosamund did not answer it. She had learned that not every thrown needle needed to be caught. Lady Marrable lifted a small account sheet from the table. "We are grateful to everyone who has contributed. Charity is most noble when it remembers its proper channels." Cassian's gaze moved from the account sheet to Lady Marrable's face. "Proper channels are precisely why I have brought Mr. Keene." The air tightened. Sir Edmund gave a lazy laugh. "Your Grace brings a steward to a charity assembly, how industrious." "I had thought we were here to raise spirits, not audit them." "Spirits often improve when accounts are honest," Cassian said. Sir Edmund's smile thinned. Honoria saw the exchange and turned quickly to the nearest basket. "Then let us begin with something cheerful." She lifted a folded piece of linen from the basket, with the delicacy of a lady discovering a dead leaf in her tea. How strange. Rosamund knew before it opened. She knew from the way Lady Marrable did not look surprised. She knew from Sir Edmund's bright, waiting amusement. Honoria unfolded the linen, and the room saw the apron. It was Rosamund's apron, the torn one she had left in the workroom at Blythe House after the dinner, mended with blue thread near the pocket. It had been washed, but not well. The tear had been tugged wider. The blue stitches remained, stubborn and unmistakable. "How did this come among the donations?" Honoria asked, her voice clear and sweet. "I hope no one mistook the laundry basket for the charity table." A whisper moved through the hall. Not loud. Worse than loud, it traveled from fan to fan, from glove to sleeve, from curiosity into appetite. Rosamund felt heat rise along her neck. For one brief, foolish instant, she was back in the dining room with the tray in her hands and laughter folding around her like smoke. Sir Edmund stepped closer to the table. "Ah." The famous garment, Lady Fenwick's cane, struck the floor once. "Take care, Sir Edmund." He bowed toward her without shame. "Dear Lady Fenwick, I mean only that objects acquire reputations, just as people do. Honoria held up the apron as if displaying a curiosity from a fair. Rosamund, is it yours, you must say? We wouldn't want to give away something dear to you. Every eye found Rosamund. Cassian stood very still. She felt him there, but he did not speak, not yet. That restraint frightened and steadied her at once. Honoria had expected him to rescue her too soon, to make Rosamund look helpless beneath his protection. Instead, he waited. Rosamund stepped forward. The floor seemed longer than it had a moment before. Yes, she said. It is mine. Honoria's eyes glittered. Then how fortunate it has been restored to you. Restored? Rosamund looked at the pulled seam. No, it has been handled. A murmur stirred. Honoria's smile hardened. Sir Edmund lifted his glass. Handled by charity, perhaps. Though one wonders, Miss Vale, whether a young lady so closely interested in relief accounts might confuse the distinction between giving and taking. The room changed again. Mockery was one thing. Accusation was another. Lady Maribel made a soft sound of protest that protested nothing. Sir Edmund, surely you don't mean— I mean nothing improper. He turned his pale gaze toward Rosamund. Only that need has a way of making fingers clever. His Grace's steward has been examining missing sums, has he not? And Miss Vale has been very near those ledgers. Cassian moved then, one step only, but everyone noticed. You appear well informed about accounts not publicly discussed. Sir Edmund's face altered by the smallest degree. One hears things. From whom? Cassian asked. Honoria laughed lightly. Your Grace, this is becoming severe again. We are at a charity assembly. So we are, he said. That is why the character of charity matters. Rosamund looked at the apron in Honoria's hand. The blue thread caught the lamplight. Not beautiful, not fine, only durable. Her mother had once told her that a poor repair became ugly only when one pretended the tear had never happened. Rosamund reached out. Give it to me. Honoria hesitated. The hesitation was a confession, though only Rosamund seemed near enough to read it. Then Honoria placed the apron in her hands with a little shrug. Of course, it's yours. Rosamund held the linen. It was lighter than humiliation should have been. This apron has been laughed at twice now, she said. Her voice was not loud, but the room was hungry enough to hear it. Once because I wore it while doing work others required of me. Now because someone placed it here and hoped it would speak shame on my behalf. Lady Maribel's face tightened. Rosamund, don't make a scene. I did not arrange this one. A few guests looked away. Cassian's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, not possessive, not pitying. Ready? Rosamund turned the apron so the torn seam faced the room. There is nothing shameful in cloth that has been used. There is nothing shameful in mending what has been torn. And there is nothing shameful in work, unless one demands it from another person and then laughs because her hands show evidence of obedience. Silence opened. It was different from the silence at dinner. That one had been shock. This one had edges. Sir Edmund recovered first. Beautifully said. But it doesn't answer the question of money. No, Rosamund said. It answers the question of character. Yours was not hidden very well. Lady Fenwick made a sound under her breath that might have been approval. Honoria's cheeks flushed. You forget yourself. I have been accused of that before. Rosamund folded the apron once, not to hide it, but to keep it under her own control. Usually by people who preferred me forgotten. Sir Edmund's jaw tightened. He had expected embarrassment. He had not expected a reply. Cassian came to stand beside her, leaving just enough distance that her courage remained visibly her own. Miss Vale, he said, his voice low enough to make the room lean toward it. Will you answer further, or shall I? It was the same gift he had given at Alder-mere. Choice. Rosamund looked at him, and in that brief exchange the assembly room receded. His scar did not frighten her. His power did not dazzle her. What shook her was the discipline with which he held both back until she decided how they might be used. "I will answer," she said. Then she faced Sir Edmund. "You mentioned missing sums." "Which sums?" His glass lowered a fraction. "I spoke generally." "You spoke as one informed. You overstate it, then say you know nothing of the wounded soldiers' relief accounts." Sir Edmund's expression sharpened. "Do not put words in my mouth. I would not need to if yours had not outrun discretion." A whisper broke from the crowd, quickly smothered. Lady Maribel stepped forward. "This has gone far enough." "Indeed it has," said a new voice from the entrance. The assembly turned. An elderly gentleman in a dark coat stood just inside the doorway, travel dust on his boots, and a leather folio beneath one arm. His hair was white, his posture bent, but his eyes were clear. Cassian inclined his head. "Mr. Shaw." Rosamund felt the name strike through her. Lady Maribel went utterly still, Mr. Peregrine Shaw looked first at the Duke, then at Rosamund, and his expression softened with recognition she had not earned, but somehow inherited. "Miss Vale," he said. "I once held a letter from your father. I believe it is time you knew why it was never answered." Mr. Peregrine Shaw's arrival changed the assembly room more thoroughly than any accusation had done. Laughter had been willing to move through that room a moment before, but truth made poorer company, and even the ladies nearest the donation table drew back as if the old solicitor had brought winter. In on his coat, Rosamund stood with the folded apron in her hands, feeling every uneven blue stitch beneath her fingers. "Mr. Shaw crossed the polished floor slowly, his leather folio held close to his chest. Cassian moved toward him, not to hurry him, but to give the room no chance to interrupt. "Mr. Shaw," he said, "you have come at a useful time. Useful times are often uncomfortable ones, Your Grace." The solicitor bowed, then turned to Rosamund. "Miss Vale, I knew your father in the final year of his life. He wrote to me concerning a trust arrangement connected to your mother's family and to Alder-mere Cottage." The name struck the room with quiet force. Lady Maribel's fan snapped open. "This is absurd." Mr. Shaw looked at her without surprise.
Good afternoon, Lady Maribel. You are mistaken.
"Or perhaps age has softened your memory into invention. Age has made me slower, my lady. It has not made me false." A murmur stirred. Honoria looked quickly towards Sir Edmund, whose easy smile had become fixed and bloodless. Rosamund could barely breathe. Her mother, Alder-mere Cottage, trust. The torn scrap in her hidden pocket had not been a desperate hope. It had been a door. Mr. Shaw opened his folio and withdrew a folded memorandum. "The original packet is no longer in my possession. I sent it to Lady Maribel after Mr. Vale's passing, because she was named temporary guardian of Miss Vale's interests until the proper trusteeship could be settled." "Temporary?" Rosamund said. The word left her quietly, but Cassian heard it, so did Lady Maribel. Mr. Shaw's expression softened. "Yes, miss, temporary." Lady Maribel stepped forward. "This is not the place for family business." "It became the place," Lady Fenwick said, "when your daughter displayed Miss Vale's apron like a prize at a fair." Honoria flushed. "I found it among the donations." "Then your household has very active laundry," Lady Fenwick replied. Sir Edmund gave a clipped laugh. "We are wandering far from charity. Surely no one here wishes to turn a harmless assembly into a tribunal." Cassian looked at him. "You were content to turn it into an accusation." Sir Edmund's mouth closed. Rosamund looked down at the apron. The blue thread seemed almost too plain to carry so much weight. "Mr. Shaw," she said, "was there proof in the packet?" There was a signed declaration, a seal, fragment, and correspondence from the late Duchess of Alder-mere, acknowledging your mother's interest in Alder-mere Cottage. There was also a note concerning a small income to be preserved for you. A small income? Lady Maribel's voice sharpened. A negligible sum, barely worth troubling a grieving young woman over. I handled what needed handling. Did you tell her? Cassian asked. Lady Maribel's smile turned fragile. She was a girl. She is a woman now. A woman with no experience of property, accounts, or the malice that gathers around money. Rosamund lifted her eyes. The malice seems to have gathered without my experience. The words landed more sharply than she expected. Several faces turned away. Lady Maribel's cheeks hardened with colour. Honoria stepped in quickly, bright and wounded. Rosamund, how can you speak so after all Mama has done? We gave you a home. And work, Rosamund said. Let's not forget the work. Honoria's eyes flashed. You enjoyed making yourself necessary. You always have. Cassian's jaw tightened, but he did not speak over Rosamund. That restraint gave her courage and cut her at the same time. A part of her wanted him to end it. Another part knew that if he did, the story would become his mercy instead of her truth. Mr. Shaw closed the folio. Without the original packet, I cannot settle the matter this afternoon. But I can state that such a packet existed, that it concerned Miss Vale, and that it was sent into Lady Maribel's care. Lady Maribel's voice trembled with controlled indignation. You can state many things. Proving them is another matter, indeed, said Mr. Shaw, which is why I intend to search my copies. Honoria leaned toward two ladies nearby, not quite whispering. How sad. Poor Rosamund has been encouraged to believe in a fortune. His Grace must think it noble to indulge her. The whisper began there. It spread faster than flame, because society preferred scandal with a moral costume. By the time the assembly ended, Rosamund heard the first version near the cloakroom. Miss Vale had found a duke and invented a trust. By the carriage steps, another version had improved itself. Miss Vale had handled relief ledgers and now claimed money was missing. By the time Lady Fenwick's carriage reached the street, a third version had acquired venom. Miss Vale had always been clever with other people's property. Rosamund sat opposite Lady Fenwick, with the apron folded on her lap and her hands resting over it. The carriage wheels rolled over wet stone. Cassian rode behind them, near enough for propriety and protection, not near enough to silence thought. Lady Fenwick watched her for nearly a mile before speaking. You held well. I shook afterward. Afterward does not count. Rosamund gave a breath that almost became a laugh and failed. They will say I am greedy. They were sayings worse when you had nothing. At least now they are afraid you may be owed something. At Blythe House, fear had arrived before the carriage. Lady Maribel stood in the morning room with Honoria, both still dressed from the assembly, their faces arranged for battle. You have shamed this family, Lady Maribel said, the moment Rosamund entered with Lady Fenwick. No, Rosamund answered. I have learned that the family may have shamed me. Honoria made a small sound of disgust. Listen to her. One afternoon of attention and she speaks like a magistrate. Careful, Lady Fenwick said. Magistrates are at least expected to hear evidence. Lady Maribel ignored her. You will not remain here under my roof while repeating these accusations. The words were meant to frighten. They did. Rosamund felt fear for strike low and practical. Roof, bed, reputation bred. Cassian entered before the silence could swallow her. His expression was controlled, but the room seemed to brace itself around him. Miss Vale will not be without shelter. Lady Maribel went very still. Your Grace, surely you do not propose to remove an unmarried young woman from her family's protection. I propose to remove her from your power. Honoria drew in a breath. Lady Fenwick lifted her brows. Rosamund turned to him. No. Cassian looked at her, and for the first time since the assembly, surprise broke through his composure. Miss Vale, no, Your Grace. Not like this. His voice lowered. You cannot remain where they may turn every servant, every caller, and every rumour against you. If I leave under your protection tonight, every rumour becomes easier for them. Lady Fenwick can receive you. Then let it be arranged properly, with her invitation, with my acceptance. Not as an escape that makes me look stolen. Cassian's injured hand flexed at his side. The movement was small, but Rosamund saw the cost of restraint. I would not steal your name from you. Then do not rescue it so quickly that I cannot carry it myself. The room fell silent. Even Lady Maribel seemed too startled to enjoy the disagreement. Cassian held Rosamund's gaze. Anger lived in him, but it was not anger at her. That made it harder to withstand. "What would you have me do?" he asked. The question was quiet. It was also immense. Rosamund swallowed. "Write to Mr. Shaw. Find the copies. Let Lady Fenwick invite me tomorrow openly. If I leave as a lady accepting a respectable invitation, not as a scandal being smuggled from a house." Lady Fenwick nodded. "That can be done. I shall send my carriage at noon." Honoria's smile returned, thin as ice. How touching. A procession for a martyr. Rosamund turned to her. "No, a departure." Lady Maribel's face hardened. "If you walk out of this house, do not expect to return to comfort." Rosamund looked around the room where comfort had always been rationed and called charity. "I shall try to bear the loss." Cassian stepped back then, not because he agreed easily, but because she had asked him to. "At noon," he said, "Lady Fenwick's carriage. Until then, my groom remains outside." "That is unnecessary," Lady Maribel said. "It is not for you." He bowed to Lady Fenwick, then to Rosamund. His eyes lingered on the apron in her hands. "Mr. Shaw mentioned blue thread." Rosamund's breath caught. "Yes. He said the original packet was bound with it, not ribbon." Lady Maribel's face emptied of expression. Honoria saw it and turned pale. The clue had found its mark. After Cassian left, Rosamund went upstairs with the apron, her father's scrap, and Mrs. Alder's laundry tag hidden beneath her bodice. She did not know that before the evening ended, Cassian would send a sealed note to Mr. Shaw, asking him to arrange a first private review without calling Miss Vale into danger. She knew only that she had asked him to stand beside her, not before her, and for now she believed he had heard. By noon the next day, Rosamund Vale left Blythe House through the front door, which made Lady Maribel angrier than if she had climbed from a window. Lady Fenwick's carriage waited in the drive, with its crest plain upon the panel, her maid seated within, and one of the Duke's grooms posted at a proper distance, with the disciplined stillness of a man instructed not to notice what he was. Preventing. Rosamund carried one small valise, the folded apron wrapped in brown paper, her father's torn scrap stitched beneath her bodice, and Mrs. Alder's laundry tag hidden inside her glove. Lady Maribel stood at the threshold, pale with a fury that could not express itself before servants. Honoria stood beside her, beautiful, composed and smiling, as though she had not slept, because victory required attention. "How grandly you depart," Honoria said. "One might think you had been invited to court instead of rescued by an old widow." Lady Fenwick, already seated in the carriage, tapped the floor with her cane. "I am not old enough to be harmless, Lady Honoria. Do remember that." Honoria's smile tightened. Rosamund looked back at Blythe House. For 6 years, she had known every back stair, every chilly linen closet, every bell that summoned her to usefulness without gratitude. She expected to feel grief. Instead, she felt the strange, almost frightening lightness of a woman who had not yet reached safety but had left captivity behind. "Goodbye, Aunt," she said. Lady Maribel's mouth trembled once. "This will not end as you imagine." "No," Rosamund answered. "I am beginning to think very little has." The carriage rolled away. Rosamund did not look back again until the house had disappeared behind the bend in the road. Only then did she allow her hands to loosen around the valise. Lady Fenwick watched her quietly. "You did well. I am not sure I did anything. Leaving properly is an action. Women are often denied even that." The words stayed with Rosamund as the carriage carried her toward Lady Fenwick's modest stone house outside Harrogate. By late afternoon, she had been given a chamber overlooking a wet garden, a tray of tea she had not been asked to serve, and an hour alone in which no one called for pins, linen, or apology. The quiet felt unnatural. It felt almost improper. She was unfolding the brown paper around the apron when a maid brought a sealed note. "For you, miss." It was left at the side gate. There was no direction, no crest, only her name written in a sharp, pretty hand trying to disguise itself. Rosamund broke the seal. One line sat in the center of the page. "His Grace collects wounded things until they cease to amuse him. Don't mistake pity for permanence. No signature. None was needed." Honoria's cruelty had always loved elegance. Rosamund read the line twice, then laid it on the table beside the apron. The words should not have reached her. They did. That was their skill. She had been called useful, poor, ungrateful, theatrical, and greedy. But pity was a more dangerous word. Pity could dress itself as kindness. Pity could stand beside a woman in public and still think of her as beneath. When Cassian arrived an hour later, properly announced and received in Lady Fenwick's drawing room, Rosamund had folded the anonymous note into a square small enough to hide in her palm. His face changed when he saw her, not with softness exactly, but with relief so controlled it seemed almost stern. "Miss Vale, Your Grace." Lady Fenwick sat near the fire with her knitting, and the unmistakable air of a chaperone prepared to miss nothing. "You may speak freely enough," she said. "I am old enough to know when to hear and when to pretend not to." Cassian accepted the rebuke in advance with a slight bow. "Mr. Shaw has found references to Sir Edmund Rookley's debts." Rosamund looked up. "Sir Edmund? He owes money in several directions quietly, urgently. 2 notes are held by a man who has done business with the Blythe estate. And the relief accounts, the altered entries correspond with dates on which Sir Edmund was received at Blythe House. So he helped them. I believe he helped himself and proved useful to Lady Maribel." The word struck between them. "Useful," Cassian noticed. "I beg your pardon." "Do not," Rosamund said. "The word is not yours alone." He studied her, and the care in his silence unsettled her more than speech would have. "Mr. Shaw has asked to review a first set of papers tomorrow morning. There may be copies in his old chambers. Then Lady Fenwick and I will attend." Cassian's hand, resting on the arm of his chair, went still. "That will not be necessary." Rosamund felt the room narrow. Why not? Because the first review may reveal nothing, or worse, reveal enough to draw accusation before proof. Sir Edmund is not harmless. Lady Maribel is desperate. I will not have you placed before them again until there is something solid beneath your feet. Before them, her voice remained calm. She was proud of that. "Or before you," his expression tightened. "Miss Vale, I mean only to spare you another public humiliation." She opened her hand and showed him the anonymous note. He read it. A shadow crossed his face, colder than anger because it was disciplined. "Who sent this? Does it matter? It says what others will be willing to believe. It is vile. It may also be useful. Do not call it that." The sharpness in his voice surprised them both. Lady Fenwick's knitting stopped. Cassian lowered his tone at once. "Forgive me. I should not have spoken so." Rosamund took back the note. "You asked Mr. Shaw not to summon me. He did not answer quickly enough." That was answer enough. A smaller hurt would have been easier to forgive. This one went precisely where Honoria's note had pointed. "You decided the truth of my father, my mother, and my name should be examined without me. For your protection? No. For your comfort. His scar seemed to pale as his face grew still. That is unjust. Is it? You could endure my humiliation when you were there to stand beside me. But you cannot endure my risk when I must stand for myself. I have seen rooms destroy people. So have I. Her voice did not rise. I lived in one. The silence after that was terrible, because it contained no misunderstanding, only pain. Cassian looked down at his injured hand, then forced the stiff fingers open. I was afraid. The confession was quiet, almost rough. I dressed fear as judgment. Rosamund wanted to soften. That was the danger. She had been trained to comfort those who had harmed her, to reward apology before change had arrived. She folded the note once more and set it aside. Your Grace, I am grateful for much, truly. But I cannot exchange Lady Maribel's locked cabinet for your guarded door. He looked at her then, and she saw the words reach him. Not all at once, deeply. What would you have me do? Tell, mister. Sure, I will attend. I cannot advise it. I did not ask whether you advise it. Lady Fenwick's needles resumed with one decisive click. Cassian inclined his head slowly. Then I will send the message. Thank you. The formality hurt them both. He rose to leave, then took a small brass token from his pocket. My carriage will remain at your disposal while this continues. Rosamund looked at the token. It bore the vain crest, small and heavy in his palm. Yesterday she might have accepted it as protection. Today it felt like permission to move only under his seal. She took it because refusing in that moment would have been rude. But when he bowed to depart, she placed it on the table between them. I will use Lady Fenwick's carriage tomorrow. Cassian looked at the token, then at her. As you wish, as I choose. His eyes closed for one brief second. When they opened, the pride was gone and the remorse remained. As you choose, Miss Vale. The next morning, Mr. Shaw's chambers smelled of paper, damp wool and old ink. Rosamund sat beside Lady Fenwick, while the solicitor sorted copies with trembling but careful hands. Cassian stood near the window, present but silent, as if honoring the boundary by feeling its full discomfort. For an hour, there was nothing but fragments, a receipt, a note from the late Duchess, a reference to trusteeship. Then Rosamund saw it in the corner of a copied sheet, half obscured by a blot. Alder-mere Cottage, reserved for the sole use and benefit of Amabel Vale's daughter, upon majority or marriage. Her mother's name, her future, a place. The room tilted, though she remained upright. Alder-mere Cottage, she whispered. Mr. Shaw leaned closer. Ah, yes. That may matter very much. Cassian took one involuntary step forward, then stopped before he reached her. He had learned. Rosamund looked at him across the space he did not cross. The ache in her chest changed. It did not vanish, but it moved. Lady Fenwick, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I should like to see it. Cassian's gaze sharpened with concern. She lifted one hand before he could speak. With a chaperone, in daylight, in your carriage, not his. Lady Fenwick smiled faintly. At last, an expedition with purpose. Cassian accepted the correction, like a man accepting a wound he had earned. Then I will send directions only, he said. And wait until you ask for more. Rosamund folded the copied sheet with care. She did not forgive him yet. She did not abandon him either. Both choices would have been simpler than trust. Alder-mere Cottage stood at the edge of the Duke's land as if it had been waiting years to be remembered. It was smaller than Rosamund had imagined, built of pale stone darkened by rain, with a low roof, 2 front windows, and a garden gone wild around a narrow path. No smoke rose from the chimney. No servant hurried out to greet them. Yet the moment Lady Fenwick's carriage stopped at the gate, Rosamund felt the strange pressure of arrival, not as one comes to a new place, but as one returns to a room where an unfinished sentence still hangs in the air. Lady Fenwick descended with her maid's help and looked at the cottage over the top of her cane. Well, she said, it has not collapsed. That is already better than many inheritances. Rosamund managed a faint smile, but her throat was tight. She carried the copied sheet from Mr. Shaw in her reticule and the wrapped apron beneath her arm, though she had almost left it behind. She had told herself it was only cloth. Then, at the last moment, she had taken it. Some evidence did not know it was evidence until the right door opened. The key had been sent from Alder-mere Hall by Mr. Keene, accompanied by a formal note and nothing more. Cassian had kept his promise. He had sent directions. He had not come. That should have pleased her entirely. It pleased her almost entirely, which was more difficult to bear. The lock resisted at first, then turned with a stiff click. The door opened into a parlour no larger than the morning room at Blythe House, but the light inside was kinder. Dust lay over the mantel. A faded chair stood near the hearth. On the wall hung a small watercolour of the hills, badly framed and tenderly kept. Rosamund stepped in and knew, without proof, that her mother had once stood there, not as a guest, not as a burden, as herself. Lady Fenwick's maid opened the shutters, and daylight spread over the floorboards. "We shall look sensibly," Lady Fenwick said. Drawers, cupboards, the writing desk, and anything a sentimental woman might have hidden in plain sight. "My mother was sentimental," Rosamund said softly, "but not foolish. Then begin where a clever sentimental woman would trust only another clever sentimental woman to look." Rosamund turned toward the corner near the hearth. Beside the chair sat a low sewing stand, its surface scarred by use. Her hand went cold. She knelt and opened the little drawer. Empty reels, a rusted needle case, a broken thimble, nothing. She searched beneath the drawer and found only dust. Disappointment rose too quickly, foolish in its force. Lady Fenwick said nothing. Rosamund closed her eyes, then opened them again and looked not at the drawer but at the stand itself. One leg sat unevenly on the floor, shorter than the others by a finger's breadth. No, not shorter, lifted. She tilted the stand and saw a thin strip of linen wrapped around the bottom, wound so neatly that it looked like a repair. Blue thread held it in place. Her breath stopped. Lady Fenwick. The older woman crossed the room faster than her cane suggested possible. Rosamund cut the old stitches with a small pair of scissors from her reticule. The linen loosened in her hand, and with it came a folded paper, flattened by years, and a small fragment of red wax, pressed into the cloth. The seal was broken, but the edge of a crest remained. Beside it, in ink-faded brown, was a witness mark and the name Amabel Vale, her mother's hand. Rosamund sat back on her heels, the room blurred, not with tears at first. With recognition too large for tears. "She kept it," Rosamund whispered. She knew someone might need it after her. Lady Fenwick crouched with difficulty and placed one gloved hand lightly on Rosamund's shoulder. Then she was a woman of excellent judgment. Rosamund unfolded the paper. It was not the full bequest, but it was enough to make the copied sheet breathe. Alder-mere Cottage was named. A small income was named. Her mother's interest was named. Rosamund's right to benefit upon majority or marriage was named. Lady Marrable's role was temporary, narrow, and never meant to become ownership. 6 years of dependence seemed to gather itself in the little room and stand exposed, mean and shabby in the daylight. Rosamund did not weep. She grew very still. "She let me darn stockings in her house," she said. "She let me mend Honoria's gowns. She let me believe I had no place." Lady Fenwick's voice was low. "You have one now." Rosamund looked down at the blue thread she had cut. "No, I had one then." A sound came from outside the crunch of wheels on the lane. Lady Fenwick's maid looked through the window. "A rider, my lady. His Grace." Rosamund rose before she understood she meant to. Cassian dismounted near the gate and stopped there, rain-dark cloak over one arm, face pale from the cold wind and the ache it likely brought to his injured hand. He did not approach the door. He waited beside the gate, visible and still, a man strong enough to hold back his own urgency. Lady Fenwick looked at Rosamund. "Shall I send him away?" Rosamund folded the paper and the linen strip together. Her fingers were steady now. "No. Please ask him to wait in the parlor doorway." Cassian came no farther than the threshold. His gaze moved from Rosamund's face to the paper in her hand, and then back again. "You found something." "My mother did." The words shook at the edges, but they did not break. She held out the linen strip. He took it carefully with his uninjured hand, and when he saw the seal fragment, the controlled line of his mouth changed. "This bears my mother's crest, and mine bears my mother's name." Cassian looked at her then, and for once his restraint seemed less like iron and more like reverence. "Miss Vale, do not pity me. I don't. Do not tell me what must be done before I have thought. I won't." The answer came without pride. Rosamund drew a breath. "Yesterday I was angry because you tried to protect me by placing yourself between me and the truth. Today I am asking you to help me carry it into a room where it can be seen." His eyes darkened. "Where would you have me stand?" The question struck more deeply than apology. Rosamund looked at the cottage, the sewing stand, the opened shutters, the proof her mother had hidden, where only a woman used to mending would find it. "Beside me," she said. "Not before me." Cassian bowed his head once. "Then beside you." They left the cottage before the rain strengthened. Lady Fenwick carried the copied sheet in her reticule. Rosamund kept the linen strip wrapped inside the folded apron, hidden in the hem where her blue stitches could be restored around it. Cassian rode behind the carriage at a proper distance, and for the first mile nothing happened. Then one of the horses shied near a narrow turn where the hedges grew high. A boy darted from the ditch, collided with the footboard, and vanished so quickly that the coachman had barely time to mush out. The carriage lurched, then steadied. No one was harmed. Lady Fenwick's maid cried out. Lady Fenwick cursed under her breath with admirable restraint. Rosamund's first thought was the proof. Her hand flew to her reticule. The copied sheet was gone. Lady Fenwick searched hers. Gone as well. Cassian reached the carriage within moments, his face set with contained fury. "What was taken?" "The copy," Rosamund said. "Not the strip." His gaze fell to the apron folded tight in her lap. Understanding passed between them. Sir Edmund, or someone paid by him, had stolen what he could see, and missed what a woman had thought. To mend, Rosamund held the apron close, not in fear now, but in decision. "Let them think they have it," she said. Cassian's injured hand tightened around the carriage door, then eased. "Mr. Shaw must see the seal." "He will," Rosamund said. "And so will Lady Marable." Cassian looked toward the rain-soft road ahead. "Then I shall send formal invitations to Alder-mere Hall. Witnesses enough to make denial expensive, but not so many that propriety becomes spectacle." "No," Rosamund said. "Let it be a spectacle if they insist." They made my apron one first. Cassian looked back at her, and this time the near smile came fully enough to be felt. "As you choose." Rosamund rested her hand over the hidden hem, feeling the blue thread, the seal, and the future her mother had refused to let vanish. "As I choose," she said. Alder-mere Hall received its witnesses with the solemn patience of a house that had seen generations lie and outlasted most of them. By 3 in the afternoon, the long drawing-room had been prepared not for entertainment, but for consequence. The curtains were drawn back to admit the pale northern light. A fire burned low in the marble hearth. Chairs had been placed with deliberate care, not in a circle, which would have suggested equality, and not in rows, which would have suggested a trial, but in an arrangement polite enough for society and honest enough to make escape difficult. Lady Fenwick sat near Rosamund's left, her cane across her knees like a sceptre no one had formerly granted her. Mr. Shaw occupied a chair beside the writing table, his folio open, his spectacles resting halfway down his nose. Mr. Keene stood with the estate ledgers. Mrs. Wren remained near the door, not as a servant waiting for orders, but as a woman prepared to remember who had spoken and how. 3 local patrons of the Relief Fund had been invited, along with the vicar's wife, whose goodness was of the practical variety, and whose gossip, therefore, had weight. Rosamund entered through the main door with the folded apron in her hands, not under brown paper, not hidden in a work-basket, folded, clean, and visible. She felt every glance land upon it, but this time she did not feel reduced by them. The linen had been laughed at in a dining room and displayed at an assembly. Now it had come to Alder-mere by her own choice. Cassian stood near the mantel, dark and still, his scar plain in the daylight, his left hand held carefully at his side. When Rosamund entered, he did not move toward her as if she needed rescue. He simply inclined his head, and the acknowledgment steadied the air between them. "Miss Vale," he said. "Your Grace." Her voice held. That seemed important. A few minutes later, Lady Maribel arrived with Honoria and Sir Edmund Rookley. They entered with the expressions of people who had dressed for innocence. Lady Maribel wore black silk trimmed with jet, a costume of injury. Honoria chose pale blue again, perhaps hoping to rewrite Harrogate in a softer colour. Sir Edmund looked unusually polished, which made his unease more visible rather than less. Lady Maribel glanced first at Rosamund, then at the folded apron, and her mouth tightened. "I had not understood we were to be summoned to a display," Cassian answered before Rosamund could. "You were invited to hear a matter of trust clarified before those whose names and funds have been touched by it. Trust." Lady Maribel gave the word a faint, wounded laugh. "It is remarkable how much damage can be done with virtuous vocabulary." Lady Fenwick lifted her eyebrows, and with charitable accounts. Sir Edmund bowed toward her. "Lady Fenwick, you remain as direct as ever. Age is wasted if it does not purchase honesty." Honoria's gaze rested on Rosamund. "You look very composed, cousin. One might almost think you had not lost the paper you were so eager to show us." There it was, too soon, too eager. Rosamund felt the room hear it. Cassian heard more than that. His eyes sharpened, but he remained still. Mr. Shaw looked over his spectacles. "Lady Honoria, how did you know a paper had been lost?" Honoria's colour altered. "Everyone knows." The story was in the air before breakfast. "The air is often assisted," Lady Fenwick said. Sir Edmund smiled. "We are not here to examine metaphors, I hope." "No," Rosamund said. The single word turned several faces toward her. She placed the folded apron on the small table before her, not dramatically, but carefully. "We are here because my father wrote before he died. Because my mother preserved what she could. Because Lady Maribel accepted temporary care of an arrangement that was never hers to own. And because every time I asked what had been done in my name, I was told I did not understand enough to ask." Lady Maribel's eyes hardened. "You do not. Then you may correct me." The quiet invitation unsettled Lady Maribel more than accusation would have. Cassian moved to the chair beside Rosamund's, but did not sit. He rested one hand on the chair back, close enough to be seen with her, far enough that no one could claim she spoke through him. The gesture reached Rosamund with almost painful precision. Beside her, not before her, Mr. Shaw opened his folio. "I possess a copy of correspondence indicating that Mrs. Amabel Vale held an acknowledged interest in Alder-mere Cottage, witnessed by the late Duchess of Alder-mere, Mr. Elias Vale wrote to me before his death, requesting confirmation that his daughter's benefit would not be absorbed into the Blythe household. His fears were fanciful," Lady Maribel said. Grief makes men suspicious. Poverty makes women convenient, Rosamund answered. The room stilled. Lady Maribel's fan trembled once. Honoria leaned forward. How beautifully rehearsed. Did His Grace write that for you? Cassian's face changed. Not much. Enough to cool the room. Do not insult Miss Vale's intelligence, because it has become inconvenient to you. Honoria looked away first. Sir Edmund took a step toward the table. May we see the famous proof, then? Or did the convenient thief take the only useful page? Rosamund looked at him. You seem very relieved by that theft. I am amused by melodrama. No, she said. You are frightened by accounting. A murmur passed through the patrons of the relief fund. Mr. Keene laid open a ledger. Several altered entries correspond with visits made by Sir Edmund to Blythe House, and with drafts handled through Lady Maribel's direction. They also correspond with sums temporarily listed under the Vale Trust transfer. Sir Edmund laughed, but it came late. A steward's suspicion is not evidence. Neither is a gentleman's smile, Lady Fenwick said. Lady Maribel rose. I will not sit here while my family is slandered by a dependent girl who mistakes disappointment for injury. The old words might once have struck Rosamund into silence. Dependent, girl, mistakes. She touched the folded apron. I was dependent because you kept me so. I gave you shelter, you gave me tasks. Shelter was the name you used when anyone might hear. Honoria stood beside her mother. You ungrateful creature. Rosamund looked at her cousin then, fully and without flinching. You mocked the apron, because you thought work made me less than you, but you were never angry that I worked. You were angry that someone important saw me doing it and did not think less of me. Honoria's lips parted. No answer came. That silence was better than apology because it was honest, Mr. Shaw cleared his throat. We still require a seal fragment or witness mark sufficient to connect the copy to the original packet. Sir Edmund spread his hands. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this moving little performance. Cassian's hand tightened on the chair back, but he did not speak. Rosamund felt that restraint like a vow being kept under strain. She lifted the apron and laid it flat upon the table. The blue stitches along the hem were uneven where she had resewn them after Keldmere Cottage. Every eye followed her fingers. Lady Maribel took one step back. It was small. It condemned her. My mother taught me to mend what must survive, Rosamund said. She also knew where women were least likely to be searched by men who believed cloth beneath their notice. She took a small blade from Lady Fenwick's sewing case and set its point beneath the line of blue thread. Honoria whispered, No, it was barely a sound, but everyone heard it. Rosamund looked up. No, Honoria said nothing. Lady Maribel's face had lost all its practiced sorrow. Sir Edmund no longer smiled. Slowly, Rosamund cut the first stitch. The thread loosened, then the second, then the third. The room leaned toward the table, drawn not by spectacle now, but by the unbearable patience of proof. Cassian stood beside her, silent as stone. Rosamund slipped her fingers beneath the hem and felt the hidden linen strip. For one moment she held it there, still unseen, while the future waited in her hand. Then she drew it free. The linen strip lay across Rosamund's palm, like a thing too plain to ruin anyone. Yet every face in the drawing-room altered when it appeared. It was no wider than 3 inches, yellowed by years, stitched along one edge with the same blue thread that had mended the apron. At one corner clung a fragment of red wax, cracked but still bearing the unmistakable curve of the vane crest. Beside it, in faded brown ink, was a witness mark, and below that the careful signature of Amabel Vale. For several seconds no one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with all the lies that had depended upon that strip never being found. Mr. Shaw rose slowly from his chair. Miss Vale, if you please. Rosamund handed it to him, and though her fingers wished to cling to it, she let go. Proof had no power if fear kept it hidden. The old solicitor carried it to the window, where the pale light touched the broken seal. He bent over it, lifted his spectacles, then lowered them again. Cassian remained beside Rosamund, so still that only the slight tension in his injured hand betrayed him. Lady Maribel's fan had closed. Honoria's lips were parted, and Sir Edmund stood with the expression of a man who had leaned against a door he believed locked and felt it open behind him. Mr. Shaw turned back to the room. This is the missing witness strip from the original Vale packet. The seal is damaged, but the visible portion corresponds with the late Duchess of Alder-mere's private crest. The hand is Mrs. Amabel Vale's. The blue stitching is described in my old memorandum. I will swear to that. Lady Maribel laughed once. It was a small sound with no strength in it. A scrap of cloth and an old man's memory. Surely, Your Grace, you will not permit a family to be condemned by sentiment. Cassian looked at her. No. I shall permit it to be condemned by conduct. Mr. Keene opened the ledger on the writing table. The entries marked as temporary Vale trust transfers were never returned to the proper account. Several sums were absorbed into household expenses at Blythe House. Other sums passed through charitable disbursements and were altered afterward. Sir Edmund stepped forward. That is outrageous. A steward has no authority to accuse a gentleman. A gentleman would have less reason to fear a steward, Lady Fenwick said. The vicar's wife, who had been silent until then, leaned toward the ledger. Those are relief funds, Mr. Keene nodded. Funds intended for wounded soldiers and their families. The room took that indifferently. Money was one thing. Charity money was another. Respectable theft, once named, lost its gloves. Sir Edmund's color rose. I handled nothing directly. Cassian's gaze moved to him. That was not a denial. It was a tactic. Honoria turned to Sir Edmund. Say something useful. The command revealed too much. Mr. Shaw looked from Honoria to Sir Edmund. Lady Honoria, did you arrange for Miss Vale's apron to be placed in the donation basket at Harrogate? No, don't lie. Sir Edmund snapped, then seemed to hear himself. Honoria went white. Lady Maribel closed her eyes briefly, not in grief, but in calculation failing under pressure. Rosamund watched them without pleasure. She had imagined once that justice would feel hot, bright, almost sweet. Instead, it felt solemn. It required her to stand near the wreckage of people who had harmed her and not become like them. Lady Honoria, Cassian said, you displayed Miss Vale's apron before a public assembly and permitted an accusation to attach itself to her name. Honoria's eyes filled, but the tears came too. I was angry. Rosamund had turned everyone against us. Rosamund looked at her cousin. No. I stopped helping you turn me against myself. Honoria flinched, as if the words had crossed the room faster than she expected. Lady Maribel reached for dignity and found only pride. I did what necessity required. Rosamund was a dependent girl. There were debts. There was a household to preserve. The trust was small. I meant to restore it when matters improved. 6 years, Rosamund said. Lady Maribel's face tightened. You were fed. So were the servants. You were family. Then why was I treated worst when no guest could see? No answer came, Mrs. Wren, near the door, lowered her eyes, but not before Rosamund saw the acknowledgement there. Mr. Shaw placed the linen strip beside the ledger. The trusteeship must be removed from Lady Maribel's control at once. The cottage and associated income should be restored to Miss Vale, under proper management until final settlement. I will prepare the necessary instruments. Lady Maribel drew herself up. You cannot do this to us in a drawing room. Cassian's voice was colder than the rain against the windows. You preferred drawing rooms when they served to humiliate Miss Vale. You cannot object to them now that they serve to hear her." Sir Edmund gave a short, desperate laugh. "And what of me? Am I to be ruined because a lady's cousin has a talent for tears and tailoring?" Rosamund turned to him with the apron still open on the table between them. "You called need a stain. You used charity to suggest I was dishonest. You knew enough of missing funds to accuse me before anyone had named the sums. If you are not ruined by that, Sir Edmund, it will only be because society has grown deaf." The vicar's wife looked at him with visible disgust. One of the local patrons stepped away from him. It was a small movement. In that world, small movements could close doors for years. Cassian addressed the room, not loudly, but with the full weight of his rank. "The House of Vane withdraws all patronage from any Blythe appeal, subscription, or social undertaking, until the Vale Trust is restored and the relief funds repaid. Sir Edmund Rookley will no longer sit, advise, subscribe through, or speak for any committee under Alder-mere protection. Mr. Shaw will prepare a written retraction of the accusation made against Miss Vale at Harrogate. Lady Maribel and Lady Honoria will sign it before those present." Honoria stared at him. "You would make a sign? I would have preferred you had not made it necessary." Lady Maribel's voice dropped. "Your Grace, for the sake of family privacy." Cassian's eyes did not move from her face. "Cruelty often asks for privacy once it is discovered." Rosamund felt that sentence settle through the room, heavier than judgment because it was true. She did not feel rescued by it. She felt witnessed. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. Mr. Shaw dipped his pen, hands shaking slightly, but not enough to spoil the first lines of the retraction. Lady Maribel watched the ink move with the horror of a woman seeing reputation become record. Honoria signed first after her mother commanded her with a look. Sir Edmund refused until Cassian informed him that refusal would be mentioned in every letter sent to the relief patrons. Then he signed with a hand, so tense the letters broke into one another. Lady Maribel signed last. When it was done, Mr. Shaw sanded the paper and set it beside the linen strip. "Miss Vale," he said gently, "your name is cleared in this matter." Rosamund looked at the apron. The cloth was still worn, the tear was still there. Proof had not made it fine. Justice had not made the past gentle, yet the room no longer saw it as a joke. They saw it as evidence of work demanded, dignity mocked, and truth preserved by women everyone had underestimated. Cassian turned to the witnesses. "Let it also be understood that Miss Vale's value was never created by this bequest, by my attention, or by any title that may stand near her. Those things have only forced this room to admit what was already true." Rosamund's throat tightened. He had not claimed her. He had not used the moment to make her gratitude public. He had given her back to herself before everyone. One by one, the witnesses rose. The vicar's wife came first and curtsied to Rosamund, not deeply, but with unmistakable respect. The local patrons followed. Lady Fenwick remained seated, watching with eyes suspiciously bright. Lady Maribel left without speaking to Rosamund. Honoria paused at the door, as if an apology might save something, then discovered she had never learned how to offer one without making herself its subject. Sir Edmund followed, diminished by silence. At last the drawing-room emptied until only Rosamund, Cassian, Lady Fenwick, Mr. Shaw, and the quiet evidence remained. Lady Fenwick rose with effort. "I shall give Mr. Shaw my opinion in the library, where he may pretend he did not ask for it." Mr. Shaw gathered his folio with a faint smile. "I should be honored to endure it." They left. The door closed softly. Rosamund stood beside the table, one hand resting near the apron, the other near the linen strip that had carried her mother's courage across 6 hidden years. Cassian did not approach until she looked at him.
"May I stand beside you now?"
he asked.
When no one is watching?
Rosamund felt the ache of the day, the wound of the past, and the dangerous warmth of wanting to answer too quickly. She looked at the scar on his face, the hand he held with careful restraint, and the man who had finally learned that protection could wait for permission. "Yes," she said, "but only beside me." He stepped to her side. Nothing more. For that moment, it was enough. 3 weeks after the drawing room at Alder-mere Hall had learned, to be honest, Rosamund Vale woke to sunlight on the windows of Alder-mere Cottage and did not wait for a bell. That alone still felt like a luxury large enough to frighten her. No one called from the corridor. No one sent a maid to say Lady Honoria required a hem lowered, a ribbon found, or an apology invented. The little cottage was quiet except for the ticking clock on the mantel and the wind moving through the garden and grass beyond the open window. Mr. Shaw's papers lay neatly tied on the writing desk, confirming what had once been hidden beneath insult and dust. The cottage was hers. The small income was hers. The trusteeship had been placed beyond Lady Maribel's reach. Every altered account had been copied, signed, and answered for, and the written retraction from Blythe House had been carried to the same families who had heard the accusation at Harrogate. It had not turned gossip kind. Nothing so miraculous occurred in English society, but it had turned gossip cautious, and caution was sometimes the first form of justice. Lady Maribel had gone to Bath under the explanation of delicate nerves, though everyone understood that invitations had begun closing before she could decline them. Honoria's expected understanding with Sir Edmund Rookley had dissolved when his creditors grew less patient and his usefulness grew less fashionable. As for Sir Edmund, he had discovered that a gentleman could survive debt more easily than exposure, but not both together. Rosamund took no joy in imagining their discomfort. Joy would have given them too much space in her new life. She preferred order. She preferred keys that belonged to her, shelves she might open without permission, and a table where she could leave her own papers, without fear that someone would lock them away and call it protection. That morning, she dressed in a soft brown walking gown, simple but fitted to her own measurements for the first time in years. Lady Fenwick had insisted upon the seamstress. Freedom should not hang like a borrowed curtain, she had said, and Rosamund had been too moved to argue. Now, as she tied her gloves, her gaze fell upon the folded apron resting in a small work-basket near the hearth. It had been washed, mended again, and stripped of its hidden burden. Without the seal and linen strip, it looked almost ordinary. That was perhaps the most astonishing part. The object that had carried humiliation, evidence, memory, and defiance was still only cloth. Rosamund touched the blue stitches and then left it there, not hidden, not displayed, simply present. At 10, Lady Fenwick's carriage brought her to Alder-mere Hall, where the house seemed less severe than it had on her first visit. Or perhaps she had changed the way she entered it. Mrs. Wren received her in the hall with a warmth so measured it could pass any inspection. "Good morning, Miss Vale. His Grace is in the estate workroom, Mr. Keene has the new relief ledger prepared." "Thank you, Mrs. Wren, and Miss Vale," the housekeeper added, lowering her voice by the smallest degree. The first pension payment under the corrected account was sent this morning. Rosamund felt the words settle inside her with quiet force. "Then something has already begun." "Yes, miss. I believe it has." In the estate workroom, sunlight lay across the long table where ledgers, maps, correspondence, and a new leather-bound book waited. Cassian stood beside the table, not behind it. He wore dark morning clothes, his scar plain, his injured hand ungloved. That, too, was a change. In the first days, she had noticed how carefully he managed the hand, how often he kept it still, concealed, disciplined. Now it rested on the table near the ledger, not offered for pity and not withdrawn from sight. Mr. Keene bowed and placed the pen before her. Miss Vale, with your approval, the corrected fund will list you as an independent patron and reviewer of disbursements connected to Alder-mere Cottage and the Vale income. Rosamund looked at the open page. Her name was written there in a clear hand. Miss Rosamund Vale. Not companion, not poor relation. Patron. The word did not make her grand. It made her responsible. She signed slowly. Her hand did not tremble until after the final letter. Cassian noticed, but he did not reach for her. He had learned the shape of restraint, and she had learned how dear it could be. Mr. Keene and Mrs. Wren withdrew to arrange the copies, and Lady Fenwick, who had come ostensibly to supervise propriety, looked around the room with theatrical innocence. I suddenly find I must examine the conservatory. At my age, one should not ignore sudden botanical impulses. Rosamund looked at her. Lady Fenwick, do not scold me. I am being a model of discretion. The door will remain open. She left with her cane tapping briskly down the corridor, and the open door did what propriety required while granting privacy enough for truth. Cassian waited until her footsteps faded. You have been busy. Rosamund glanced toward the ledger. So have you. Mr. Shaw says the transfer will be complete by Michaelmas. The cottage repairs are to begin next week, unless you object to any of them. The income is arranged through your own account, not mine. Not Alder-mere's. You sound as though you have rehearsed that. I have. The admission was plain enough to make her smile. Why? Because I wished to give you no reason to think I was building another beautiful cage. The smile softened into something more fragile. Thank you. Do not thank me too quickly. I have more to say, and some of it may be badly done. Then do it honestly. Cassian looked down at his injured hand, then back at her. When I first saw you at Blythe House, I thought I recognized humiliation. I knew the shape of a room that pretended not to stare while it cut a person to pieces. I was proud that I saw it. Too proud. I thought seeing clearly meant I understood what you needed. Rosamund stood very still. And now? Now I know that seeing pain is not the same as honoring the person who carries it. His voice roughened slightly, but he did not look away. You did not need me to give you worth. You had it when you stood in that passage. You had it when you caught a servant girl's spoon, when you answered Sir Edmund, when you cut the stitch from that hem, with every person in the room waiting for you to fail. I did not make you visible, Rosamund. I was merely the first powerful man in the room, forced to admit he had been blind along with the rest. Her name in his voice felt different without an audience. More dangerous, more true. You were not blind for long, long enough to hurt you. Yes. He accepted the word without flinching. Then I ask no forgiveness I have not earned. From the inner pocket of his coat, he withdrew a small folded paper, not a ring, not yet. He placed it on the table between them. This is the agreement. Confirming your cottage, income, and patronage role remain yours, entirely yours. Whether you continue to know me, dismiss me from your life, or one day choose to marry any man you please. Rosamund looked at the paper, then at him. Any man? A faint warmth entered his severe face. I admit I dislike that clause. Yet you included it, because love that requires dependence is only vanity dressed as devotion. The room seemed to grow quiet around them. Rosamund touched the edge of the paper, but did not pick it up. And what is it you want, Your Grace? Cassian, he said softly. If you can bear it. Her breath caught. He stepped back once, giving her space even in that. I want to ask whether you might walk with me, argue with me, correct my ledgers, challenge my judgments, and stand beside me in every room where society expects either of us to apologize for surviving. I do not ask you to stand behind me as Duchess. I ask whether you could bear to stand beside me as Rosamund. The proposal came without spectacle, and because of that, it reached places spectacle never could. Rosamund thought of the servant passage, the dining-room laughter, Harrogate's whispers, Lady Marable's locked cabinet, the cottage waiting in rain, and the old blue thread her mother had trusted to time. Then she thought of the man before her, scarred, proud, imperfect, and trying with all the discipline in him not to turn love into command. Yes, she said. His face changed, not dramatically. Cassian Vane was not a man made for easy display, but the breath left him as if he had been holding it for years, yes? Yes, Cassian, but I will keep the cottage. I hoped you would, and the relief accounts. I feared you would. She laughed then, a small sound, surprised from her, and his answering smile came slowly, like sunlight reaching a room long shuttered. He did not take her hand until she offered it. When he did, his injured fingers closed carefully around hers, and the gentleness of that care was worth more than any grand declaration. Later, after Lady Fenwick returned with suspiciously little knowledge of the conservatory, after Mr. Keene pretended not to notice anyone's eyes, after the formalities had begun to arrange themselves into a future, Rosamund went back to the workroom alone for one final task. From her basket, she took the old apron and cut a small square from the mended hem where the blue thread still held. She stitched it inside the front cover of the new relief ledger, neat and firm, a private mark in a public book. Cassian came to the doorway and waited until she looked up. He did not ask if she wished to hide it. He understood. Some scars belonged in the open. Some were sewn where they could strengthen the binding. Rosamund smoothed the page over the cloth and closed the ledger. The sound was soft, final, and full of peace. Cassian stood beside her, and this time she stayed because she wished to.